Ethan Banks sat in his small, dimly lit studio, the smell of oil paints, turpentine, and the musty scent of old canvas filling the air. It was a space that had seen better days, a tiny, forgotten corner of the city that no one cared to notice. The walls were covered with his works, bold splashes of color, surreal landscapes, and portraits that seemed to have a life of their own. Yet, despite the talent that radiated from each piece, no one seemed to care. Ethan had spent years perfecting his craft, pouring his heart and soul into each brushstroke. But the world was indifferent. His art, while unique and captivating, had never received the attention it deserved. Every rejection letter from galleries felt like another weight added to his shoulders. The prestigious art world, it seemed, had its doors firmly shut to someone like him. Born and raised in the heart of the city, Ethan had always known that the world was never kind to people who didn't fit the mold. Growing up in a poor neighborhood, his parents had struggled to make ends meet, their dreams always just out of reach. Ethan's talent had been his escape, but it also set him apart. His art was unconventional, raw, emotional, and often hard to digest. It didn't align with the polished, commercial works that dominated the mainstream. But Ethan didn't care. Art, to him, wasn't about fitting in, it was about expression, about telling stories that needed to be heard. Today was no different from any other. Ethan had just finished one of his most ambitious pieces, a massive painting that portrayed a chaotic urban landscape juxtaposed with a surreal dreamlike sky. It was a commentary on society's growing disconnection, a visual exploration of what it meant to feel alone in a crowded world. But no one had come to see it. The local galleries had all turned him down, too busy catering to the tastes of the wealthy elite to give a chance to an unknown artist like him. Ethan leaned back in his worn-out chair, rubbing his eyes. The day had been long, and he was growing tired. But he couldn't stop. Art was his calling, even if the world refused to acknowledge it. It wasn't just about fame or money, it was about leaving a mark, about creating something that would last long after he was gone. But sometimes, in moments like this, when the rejection letters piled up and his bank account ran dry, Ethan wondered if that dream would ever become a reality. His phone buzzed on the nearby table, snapping him out of his thoughts. He reached for it absently, his eyes scanning the message that had popped up. Gallery showcase, open call for new artists. Deadline in 2 days. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had applied to countless gallery showcases over the years, but this one felt different. The name of the gallery was well known, and this could be his big break, the one opportunity that could change everything. The message said they were accepting submissions from artists of all backgrounds, but only the most exceptional would be chosen. Ethan had to act fast. With renewed energy, he set to work. His fingers moved quickly as he captured his most recent piece, photographing it in the best light possible. It was the piece he felt most connected to, a visual representation of the struggles he had faced as an artist, an immigrant, and a black man in a world that often overlooked him. He poured his soul into that painting, and he hoped the right person would see it for what it truly was, not just a painting, but a statement. Within the hour, Ethan had submitted his application. He sat back, allowing himself a small moment of hope. This could be the opportunity that finally gave him the recognition he deserved. For the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of excitement. The next day, Ethan's phone rang while he was in the middle of cleaning his brushes. He answered it without thinking, his mind already on the next project he had planned. "Hello," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Mr. Banks?" a smooth, condescending voice asked. It was a voice Ethan recognized immediately. It was Vincent Caldwell, the owner of Caldwell Gallery, one of the most prestigious galleries in the city. Caldwell had a reputation for being a tastemaker, a man who only showcased the best of the best. But he also had a reputation for being dismissive of anything that didn't fit his idea of high art. "Yes, this is Ethan Banks," he replied, his heart rate quickening. "How can I help you?" "I've taken a look at your submission," Caldwell said, his tone cool and dismissive. "And while I appreciate the effort, I have to be honest with you. Your work, well, it doesn't quite fit the standard we're looking for." Ethan felt a wave of disappointment wash over him, but he forced himself to stay calm. "I understand," he said, his voice steady despite the sting. "I'm just trying to make my art seen, Mr. Caldwell." Caldwell chuckled lightly, the sound laced with arrogance. "Seen? Well, I'm afraid art like yours doesn't exactly attract the right kind of audience. You see, galleries like mine deal with high-end clients, collectors who are looking for something more refined. Something that appeals to the elite." Ethan's grip tightened around the phone, but he didn't say anything. He had heard this all before. The art world was full of gatekeepers, men like Caldwell who decided what was worthy and what wasn't based on money, reputation, and status. They cared nothing for the raw passion behind the work, only for the price tag that came with it. "I see," Ethan said, forcing a smile. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Caldwell." Before Caldwell could reply, Ethan hung up the phone, his heart pounding in his chest. He had expected rejection, but hearing it so plainly, so matter-of-factly, stung in a way he hadn't anticipated. He wasn't surprised, but the reality of it hurt nonetheless. This was how it always went. The world of art was reserved for those who could afford to buy their way in, not for someone like him. But Ethan wasn't one to give up easily. He had faced adversity his whole life, growing up in a rough neighborhood, fighting to make a name for himself as a black artist in a field dominated by the wealthy elite. He had learned long ago that the world didn't care about his struggles, that he had to fight for every inch of recognition. And fight he would. The phone call didn't deter him. If anything, it fueled him. Caldwell's words rang in his mind as he grabbed a fresh canvas and began to paint. The rejection only made him more determined to prove them all wrong. To show the world that his art, his unique perspective, was worth more than any polished, elitist creation that hung in the walls of fancy galleries. And as he painted, a thought formed in the back of his mind: one day, he would be the one in control. One day, he would own a gallery, one that celebrated diversity, creativity, and voices that were often ignored. He would be the one who decided what was worthy. The gallery owner's dismissive attitude would be a thing of the past. He didn't know how, but he knew that this was only the beginning. The world had underestimated him, just like they had underestimated so many others. And one day, Ethan's days began to blur together as he continued to work relentlessly on his art, pushing through rejection after rejection. His small studio, filled with canvases both finished and in progress, became his sanctuary. But the outside world, those elite art collectors and gallery owners, remained a distant, seemingly unattainable world. The rejection from Caldwell Gallery had stung more than most, but Ethan refused to let it define him. One chilly evening, as Ethan was preparing for another late-night painting session, his phone buzzed again. This time, the message was different. It was an invitation, an offer he hadn't expected. It came from an assistant at the Caldwell Gallery, inviting him to meet with Vincent Caldwell in person. The message was brief, almost curt: "Mr. Caldwell wishes to see your work in person. Please arrive at 10 a.m. tomorrow." Ethan's pulse quickened. The invitation felt like a second chance, and though he was still cautious about Caldwell's intentions, he couldn't help but wonder if this was the opportunity he had been waiting for. He had never been one to back down from a challenge. This could be his moment to prove himself, not just as an artist, but as someone worthy of a place in the art world. The next morning, he carefully selected a few of his most striking works to bring with him to the gallery, pieces he had spent months perfecting. He wore his best suit, trying to put aside the nerves that gnawed at him. This meeting could change everything. The Caldwell Gallery was located in one of the most prestigious areas of the city. Its sleek, modern design stood in stark contrast to the older, more eclectic buildings that surrounded it. As Ethan approached, he couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. The gallery's polished exterior gave off an air of exclusivity, a place where only the most refined art and the wealthiest patrons were welcomed. Upon entering, Ethan was immediately struck by the sterile, minimalist aesthetic. White walls stretched from floor to ceiling, and the space was filled with modern art pieces that screamed sophistication. The gallery had an atmosphere of quiet elegance, almost too perfect to feel real. Ethan felt out of place, like an intruder in a world he hadn't yet been invited into. He was escorted through the gallery by a young assistant, who seemed eager to show him around. The assistant led him to a private room at the back, where Vincent Caldwell stood waiting. Caldwell was exactly as Ethan had imagined, an older man, sharply dressed in a tailored suit, his hair carefully styled. His presence was commanding, but there was something distant about him, as if he existed in a world of his own, a world where people like Ethan were little more than a curiosity. "Mr. Banks," Caldwell said, his voice smooth and patronizing. "I'm glad you could make it." He gestured for Ethan to sit. "I've reviewed your work, and while I'm not usually one to venture outside my usual circle of artists, I have to admit, you have a certain rawness to your style." Ethan nodded but didn't speak. His gut told him not to get too excited just yet. He had heard enough flattery over the years to know that sometimes, it was just a way to sugarcoat the inevitable rejection. "I've been thinking about your pieces," Caldwell continued, his eyes scanning one of Ethan's paintings. "They have potential, I'll give you that. But they're not what I would call refined. They're too visceral, too confrontational. And as you know, the art world is a place where taste and sophistication are valued above all else. The kind of art that speaks to the heart rather than the mind doesn't always translate well to the market." Ethan clenched his jaw, trying to remain composed. He had heard it all before, that his art was too bold, too loud, too unpolished. But Caldwell's words, though dismissive, didn't sting as much as they once would have. Ethan had come to understand that art was a personal thing, a reflection of the creator. And while Caldwell may have been right about the market, Ethan didn't care about the market. He cared about what his art meant, what it could do for the people who saw it. "I'm not concerned about what the market wants," Ethan said, his voice steady, though his heart raced in his chest. "I create art to express myself, to show the world something different. I'm not here to cater to wealthy collectors." Caldwell raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by Ethan's response. "Interesting," he mused. "You're certainly not the typical artist. I'll give you that." He paused, then leaned forward slightly. "But tell me, Mr. Banks, do you really believe that your art can stand up to the kind of pieces that fetch millions at auction? The kind of work that attracts the world's top collectors?" Ethan felt a surge of confidence. He had no illusions about the art world or the way it worked. He knew that money played a significant role in determining what was considered valuable, but he refused to let that dictate his work. "Art isn't about price tags or who can afford it," Ethan said firmly. "It's about connection. It's about evoking something in people that they didn't know was there. Whether that's worth millions or not doesn't change the fact that it's still meaningful." Caldwell's eyes narrowed slightly, as if weighing Ethan's words. "I see. You're more idealistic than I thought." The conversation continued for a while, with Caldwell offering his thoughts on the art world, on the industry's obsession with high-priced works, and on the barriers that kept certain types of art out of the spotlight. Ethan listened intently, but his mind was elsewhere. He had an idea, a plan that was beginning to form in his mind, though he wasn't ready to reveal it just yet. Eventually, Caldwell leaned back in his chair and gave Ethan a measured look. "I'm not convinced, Mr. Banks." "Not yet. But," he paused, as if considering something. "I'd like to invite you to an event we're hosting next month, a private showing for select buyers. If you're willing to take the time to refine your pieces, maybe you'll find a way to align them with what my clientele is looking for." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. It was an opening, a crack in the door. And Ethan wasn't about to let it close without pushing through. "I'll be there," Ethan said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "And I'll have something ready. Something that will speak to your audience." Caldwell smiled, though there was a hint of skepticism in his eyes. "I look forward to seeing what you can come up with, Mr. Banks. But remember, it's not just about art. It's about how you sell it." Ethan stood up, nodding respectfully. As he left the gallery, a new sense of purpose surged through him. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. The world would see his art, and it would understand its value, whether Caldwell liked it or not. The days following his meeting with Vincent Caldwell passed in a whirlwind of uncertainty. Ethan threw himself into his work, determined to prove that his art could hold its ground, not just in the market but in the hearts of those who truly appreciated it. He was still reeling from Caldwell's condescending attitude, but that didn't matter anymore. The gallery owner had given him a glimmer of hope, however small, and that was enough for Ethan to push forward. Ethan spent late nights in his studio, experimenting with new techniques, honing his craft. He worked on a new piece, one that would be his statement to the art world, a bold declaration of his unique vision. He painted with intensity, using bright splashes of color to represent the chaos and beauty of the world around him. Each stroke was a manifestation of his passion, his pain, and his determination to be seen. This piece was different from anything he had done before. It was not just an expression of his personal struggles, but a challenge to the world that had ignored him. As the day of Caldwell's private showing drew closer, Ethan received a strange message. It wasn't from Caldwell or anyone involved in the gallery, it was from an anonymous buyer. The message was brief, yet unsettling. "I've seen your work. I know what it's worth. We need to talk. Call me." Ethan stared at the screen, unsure of what to make of it. He didn't recognize the number, and there was no mention of any specific piece. But something about the message felt urgent, like the words were carrying a weight far beyond their simplicity. He was used to being overlooked, used to fighting for attention in a world that seemed uninterested in his art. But this felt different. This felt like the beginning of something significant. After some hesitation, Ethan dialed the number. The phone rang for several moments before a voice answered, deep, calm, and somewhat robotic. "Mr. Banks, I presume?" the voice asked. "Yes, who is this?" Ethan replied, trying to mask the curiosity in his voice. "I'm a collector," the voice said cryptically. "And I've been watching your work for a while. You have talent, Mr. Banks. Talent that is being wasted in galleries that don't understand its true worth." Ethan was taken aback. "What do you mean? Who are you?" The voice chuckled softly. "I think you'll find out soon enough. For now, just know that your art, your vision, has value beyond what you can imagine. I can offer you an opportunity. A deal that could change everything for you. But first, I need you to trust me." Ethan's mind raced. Could this be the breakthrough he had been waiting for? His gut told him that this wasn't some random collector, it was someone who understood the value of his work in a way that few others did. He didn't know how they had found him, but the opportunity felt too important to ignore. "What kind of deal are we talking about?" Ethan asked, keeping his voice steady. "I'll make it simple," the voice replied. "I want to purchase one of your pieces. A painting of mine, to be specific. But I'm not talking about just any painting. I want the one you're currently working on, the one that will be showcased at Caldwell Gallery." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The painting he had been working on for the past few weeks, the one he felt could change everything, was the piece this mysterious buyer wanted. The buyer wanted it before anyone else could see it, before the gallery event had even taken place. Ethan hesitated, unsure of how to respond. I can't just sell it like that," he stammered. "It's not finished yet. I need to show it, to get feedback. I've worked too hard on this piece to just let it go." The voice on the other end was patient, but there was an underlying firmness in its tone. "I understand your hesitation. But think carefully, Mr. Banks. I am offering you something that the gallery owner, someone like Caldwell, could never offer. I'm offering you power. Influence. An entry into a world that is reserved only for the select few. If you sell this piece to me, it will never be about the whims of someone like Caldwell. It will be about you. You will control your destiny." Ethan paused. The words felt heavy, like they carried an unspoken promise. The more he thought about it, the more the offer began to make sense. He had always struggled against the system that placed value on certain kinds of art, that deemed him unworthy because he didn't fit their narrow definition of success. But what if he didn't have to fit into their world at all? What if he could create his own? I'll consider it, Ethan said, his voice firm. But I need to know more. I need to meet you. The voice seemed to smile, though Ethan couldn't see it. I think you'll find that the right opportunity will present itself when the time comes. Just know this, Mr. Banks, this is a chance to break free from the chains of a system that has no interest in you. You'll never need a gallery like Caldwell's again. With that, the call ended, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. The next day, as Ethan walked through the city streets on his way to the Caldwell Gallery, his mind was consumed with the phone call. The mysterious buyer's words echoed in his head. He couldn't ignore it. Something about the offer felt too good to be true, and yet, part of him knew it was an opportunity he couldn't pass up. But would selling his work before anyone could see it, before it had been judged, be a mistake? Would he be sacrificing the chance to prove himself? As he approached the gallery, the familiar sense of doubt crept back into his mind. He was about to enter a space where the people who had dismissed him as too raw or too unpolished would be gathering. He had nothing but his art to offer them, and yet he couldn't shake the feeling that Caldwell and the others would never truly understand what he was trying to say. Maybe the anonymous buyer had a point. Maybe the art world wasn't the place for him, after all. He shook off his doubts and entered the gallery. Inside, the atmosphere was as sterile and elitist as always, but today, there was a new energy in the air. The private showing was set to begin soon, and the people milling about were clearly influential, wealthy collectors, well-known critics, and high-powered individuals who could make or break an artist's career. Caldwell greeted him at the door, his usual condescending smile in place. "Ah, Mr. Banks," Caldwell said, offering a handshake. "I trust you brought something special for us today?" Ethan's mind was still spinning from the phone call, but he nodded and smiled, putting on his best mask of composure. He had something special for them, all right. But whether Caldwell or anyone else in the room would recognize its true worth remained to be seen. The twist had already begun, and Ethan knew that, no matter how it played out, he was no longer a struggling artist. He was someone with options, someone who had the power to shape his future. Whether he chose to stay and fight the system or walk away from it entirely was now entirely up to him. Ethan stood in the midst of the exclusive gallery event, his heart pounding in his chest. The air was thick with the scent of expensive wine and the murmur of wealthy patrons discussing art, their voices laced with polite indifference. They glanced at the paintings on the walls, their gazes critical, as if deciding whether they were worth their exorbitant price tags. To them, the art was just another commodity, a status symbol. Ethan couldn't help but feel like an outsider. This world, the one he had been trying so hard to break into, felt even more foreign to him now. The art was beautiful, yes, but it wasn't alive the way his work was. The work on the walls here was pristine, flawless, and carefully curated. It had been created with an eye toward marketability, not with passion. And Ethan wasn't sure if he could stand being a part of it. As Caldwell led him through the gallery, discussing the intricacies of each piece, Ethan's thoughts were elsewhere. He was distracted, his mind still processing the strange phone call from the mysterious buyer. The opportunity had been too enticing to ignore, yet now that he was here, in the gallery, part of him questioned whether he was making the right choice. The decision seemed monumental, and yet, it felt as though the universe was pushing him toward a new path, one where he wouldn't have to fight for validation or acceptance. "Mr. Banks, this way," Caldwell said, snapping Ethan from his thoughts. "I believe your piece is ready to be viewed. I must say, I'm very curious about how you've refined it." Ethan followed Caldwell to the front of the room, where his latest work, a large canvas full of swirling colors and bold lines, was positioned. It was the piece he had been working on in his studio for the past few weeks. The piece that would define his career. Ethan had put everything into it, the raw emotion, the frustration, the joy, the chaos of his life up until that point. The painting wasn't just an image, it was an experience. And yet, as he stood there, he could see that the guests weren't moved by it. They were polite but detached. Some nodded in approval, while others simply made passing remarks about the colors or the technique. No one seemed to feel the intensity of the piece. No one understood the message behind it. Caldwell leaned in close. "It's unconventional," he said, his tone neutral but not unkind. "But I can see it has potential. It might not fit my usual clientele, but there's a market for more daring work." Ethan felt a pang of disappointment. It wasn't the rejection that stung, it was the fact that Caldwell still didn't get it. His art was never about fitting into a mold, never about appeasing the tastes of the wealthy. It was about breaking boundaries, about expressing truths that others were too afraid to acknowledge. "I'm glad you see potential," Ethan replied quietly, his eyes still fixed on the painting. But his mind wasn't on Caldwell anymore, it was on the phone call, the mysterious buyer's offer. Was this what he wanted? To stay here, to continue playing the game of approvals and critiques, knowing that the world would never fully understand the meaning behind his work? Or was it time to step into the unknown, to take control of his own future, and to refuse to be beholden to a system that had always seen him as an outsider? Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden voice, cutting through the hum of the room. "That's quite a bold piece," a deep voice said. Ethan turned to see a man standing beside him, his face partially obscured by shadows. He was dressed impeccably, his posture confident, but there was something about him that made Ethan feel like he was being studied, analyzed. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" Ethan asked, taken aback by the man's sudden appearance. The stranger smiled, a thin, almost predatory smile. "I'm someone who knows talent when I see it," he said, his voice smooth, but carrying an unmistakable authority. "I've been following your work for a while, Mr. Banks. And I must say, your latest piece is more than just potential. It's something far more valuable." Ethan's pulse quickened. There it was again, the same feeling from the phone call, the sense that this was not just any collector. This man knew something, saw something in Ethan's work that no one else had recognized. "You've been following my work?" Ethan asked, still unsure of who this man was. "Who are you?" The stranger glanced around, as if checking to see if anyone was listening. Then he leaned in closer. "I'm the one who made you an offer," he whispered. "The one who knows what your art is truly worth." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The mysterious buyer. He had thought the phone call was just a fluke, something too good to be true. But now, here this man was, standing right in front of him. "You're the one who contacted me?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man nodded, his eyes gleaming with a knowing look. "I am. And I'm here because I believe in your work. Not just as an artist, but as someone who has the potential to change the very system that governs this world. The system that makes people like Caldwell believe they have the power to define what art is worth." Ethan felt a jolt of realization. The mystery was starting to clear. This man wasn't just some rich collector, he was someone who saw art the way Ethan did. He wasn't interested in buying a piece to display on a wall like a trophy. He wanted something deeper. He wanted to help Ethan rise above the very world that had tried to keep him in the shadows. But Ethan was still wary. "What's the catch?" he asked. "Why me?" The stranger smiled again, his expression both enigmatic and reassuring. "There's no catch, Mr. Banks. Only opportunity. You have something most artists will never get, the chance to redefine the market, to create a legacy that will last far beyond the whims of gallery owners and critics. I want to help you get there." Ethan paused, considering the offer. The more he thought about it, the more it made sense. He had never fit into the mold of what the art world expected. He wasn't interested in becoming another cog in the machine. This was the chance to break free, to carve out his own place in the world of art. "All right," Ethan said, his voice steady. "Let's talk." The stranger's eyes twinkled with satisfaction. "I knew you'd understand. I think we're going to make something truly special together." As the conversation continued, Ethan began to feel a shift in his perception. The decision to leave behind the conventional path of gallery exhibitions, of playing the game with collectors like Caldwell, was daunting. But he realized that he was no longer willing to compromise his vision for the sake of approval. He had spent too long chasing validation from a world that never truly saw him. Now, for the first time, he felt like he was in control. The choice was clear. Ethan wasn't going to sell his soul to the system. He was going to sell his art on his terms. And with this mysterious buyer's help, he could finally create the life and career he had always dreamed of. As the evening wore on, Caldwell made his rounds, discussing his usual deals with various patrons, unaware that Ethan's world was changing before his very eyes. Caldwell may have been the gatekeeper of the gallery world, but Ethan knew now that he didn't need to play by his rules anymore. The system had underestimated him. But no longer. With this new alliance, Ethan was on the brink of something monumental. The real work was about to begin. And this time, it wouldn't be about fitting in, it would be about standing out. Ethan's world had shifted in ways he could barely comprehend. The phone call from the mysterious buyer, followed by the private meeting at the gallery, had set everything in motion. What had once seemed like a dream, the idea of taking control of his destiny, creating art that was unapologetically his own, was now within reach. As the evening continued at the Caldwell Gallery, Ethan felt more and more disconnected from the world around him. The clinking of glasses and the low murmur of polite conversation were distant sounds, like they belonged to another universe. He was no longer interested in the flattery of gallery owners or the approval of critics. What mattered now was the future, his future, and the opportunity to step into a new world of creative freedom. As soon as he could, he excused himself from the gathering, telling Caldwell that he had to leave early to finish a project at the studio. The gallery owner nodded absently, too caught up in his own dealings to notice the shift in Ethan. After all, Caldwell had only seen Ethan as a means to an end, another artist he could market for a profit. But now, Ethan realized he was done being anyone's project. In the solitude of his studio, Ethan sat down with a deep sigh, staring at the half-finished painting on the easel before him. This was the piece, the one that had captured the attention of the mysterious buyer. The one that had started everything. It was bold, chaotic, and layered with meaning. Ethan had poured his soul into it, but now, it felt like more than just a painting. It felt like a symbol of his new beginning. As he stood before the canvas, a text message buzzed on his phone, snapping him from his reverie. It was from the buyer. "We need to meet again. I have a plan that will change everything. You're ready." The words were simple, but they struck a chord deep within him. Ethan's pulse quickened. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. The next day, Ethan met the mysterious buyer at a secluded, upscale office building in the heart of the city. The building was stark and modern, a far cry from the cold, whitewashed galleries he had grown accustomed to. There were no paintings hanging on the walls here, just polished concrete and sleek, minimalist furniture. The man, who introduced himself simply as Theo, led Ethan into a private conference room. Theo was older than Ethan had expected, but there was something about his presence that commanded attention. His suit was sharp, his posture impeccable. He exuded confidence without saying a word, as if his very existence was a statement of authority. "Mr. Banks," Theo greeted him, offering a firm handshake. "I'm glad we could meet today." Ethan took a seat, his mind racing. He had no idea what to expect from this meeting, but he knew one thing for sure, this was the opportunity he had been waiting for. He wasn't going to squander it. "I've been thinking about what you said," Ethan began. "About taking control of my art. And I want to know more. What exactly is it you're offering me?" Theo smiled, almost as if he had been expecting this question. "What I'm offering you is a new way of looking at art. The current system, the one where galleries like Caldwell's control everything, has kept real talent suppressed for far too long. It's a world that's more interested in profit than true creativity. But that's about to change." Ethan listened intently, feeling his pulse quicken. He had always known that the system was flawed, but hearing someone else articulate it so clearly felt like a revelation. You see, Theo continued, I have access to a network of buyers, investors, and collectors who are tired of the status quo. They want something real, something raw. And that's where you come in. We're going to give you the platform you deserve. A place where your art isn't just seen, it's celebrated for its authenticity. Ethan's heart raced as the words sank in. This wasn't just about selling a few paintings, it was about redefining the art world itself. What do you mean, a platform? Ethan asked, trying to contain his excitement. We're talking about an online marketplace, a private network, Theo explained. We'll provide you with the tools to sell your art directly to the people who truly understand it. No galleries. No middlemen. Just you, your art, and a community of supporters who appreciate the value of what you create. Ethan's mind was spinning. The idea of bypassing the traditional gallery system, of cutting out the gatekeepers entirely, was exhilarating. It was the chance to be fully in control of his work, without compromise. And it wasn't just about the money, it was about being seen, being understood, on his own terms. And the best part, Theo added, is that you'll be able to shape your own career. You'll have the freedom to decide where your art goes, who sees it, and how it's sold. It's your vision, Ethan. You deserve to have that control. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt a spark of hope. This was the break he had been waiting for, the chance to finally step outside the system that had always held him back. But there was a part of him that hesitated. The unknown was daunting. There was no safety net in this new world Theo was offering. Ethan had spent years building his career in the traditional art scene. Could he really leave it all behind and start fresh? Theo seemed to read his mind. I know it's a lot to take in. But think of it this way, staying in the system means being constantly at the mercy of people who don't understand what you're about. They don't see the true value of your work, they just see a commodity to be traded. This is your chance to redefine what art means, to be a part of something bigger than just the art world. You have the power to change the game, Ethan. But only if you're willing to step away from the old ways. Ethan sat back in his chair, his thoughts swirling. The decision was monumental. It was more than just about a career, it was about his identity as an artist, his legacy. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Ethan spoke. I'm in, he said, his voice firm with resolve. Let's do it. Let's change the system. Theo's smile deepened, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. I knew you'd make the right choice. Welcome to the future, Mr. Banks. Your journey is just beginning. As they shook hands, Ethan felt a sense of liberation he had never experienced before. This was no longer just about making a name for himself, it was about creating a new world for artists like him. A world where the system no longer dictated who could succeed and who couldn't. A world where creativity, authenticity, and vision were the only things that mattered. As he left the building, Ethan felt the weight of the decision settle over him. The path ahead would not be easy, but it was his to walk. The art world would never be the same again. And neither would he. The transformation had begun. Ethan's first weeks working with Theo and the new platform were a whirlwind of activity, but unlike anything he had ever experienced before. The speed at which things moved in this new world was dizzying, each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities. The pressure was immense, but so was the thrill of knowing that he was finally in control of his career, his art, and his future. The online marketplace, which Theo had promised would be an exclusive space for visionary artists like Ethan, was starting to take shape. It wasn't just an e-commerce site, it was a community, a movement. The platform didn't just sell art, it created an ecosystem for artists to thrive, where their work could be displayed in a way that highlighted its true worth, without the distortion of galleries or middlemen. Ethan's first major task was to upload a series of his paintings. These weren't just any paintings, they were his most personal, his most raw. The pieces he had always been afraid to share, for fear of not being accepted, of not being understood. But now, those fears seemed trivial. The community on the platform wasn't interested in sanitized, market-driven art. They wanted authenticity. They wanted the truth. As he uploaded his work, he added personal stories behind each piece, explaining the emotions and experiences that had driven him to create them. He felt vulnerable, but empowered. This was the moment he had always dreamed of, the chance to show the world who he really was, not just as an artist, but as a person. Within hours, the response was overwhelming. Comments poured in, praising his bravery and the emotional depth of his work. People who had never met him before understood exactly what he was trying to say. The validation he received was like nothing he had ever experienced before. It wasn't just praise for his technique or style, it was recognition of his soul, of his voice. Ethan's work was quickly becoming one of the platform's most sought-after collections. But what he didn't expect was how quickly his influence began to grow. Not only were collectors reaching out, but other artists were, too. They saw what he was doing, and they wanted in. They wanted to know how they could escape the constraints of traditional galleries and share their work in a space that celebrated true creativity. One evening, as Ethan was going through the messages on his profile, he received a direct message from a fellow artist, a sculptor named Rachel. Her message was simple but impactful. "Your story inspired me. How do I join? How do we make this movement bigger?" Ethan smiled as he read the message. This was exactly what he had hoped for, a community of artists who were willing to support each other, who were ready to break free from the old system and create something new. The movement was gaining momentum, and Ethan could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. He was no longer just an artist, he was a leader in this revolution. The days turned into weeks, and the platform's success continued to grow. Theo had kept his word, his network of investors and buyers was driving significant traffic to the site. More and more people were drawn to the authenticity of the art, to the power of the voices behind the creations. For the first time, Ethan didn't feel like a cog in a machine. He was the engine, propelling this movement forward. But as his success grew, so did the pressure. The old art world, the one he had left behind, was starting to take notice. Caldwell, the gallery owner who had once dismissed him, was suddenly calling again, asking if Ethan was ready to come back into the fold. He wanted to offer Ethan a spot in his prestigious gallery, to take his career to the next level. Ethan could almost hear the desperation in his voice, the thinly veiled attempt to reclaim the artist he had once thought was unmarketable. Ethan didn't even hesitate. He declined the offer with a polite but firm response, explaining that he was no longer interested in traditional galleries. Caldwell's offer was a relic of the past, a reminder of the world that Ethan had left behind. He no longer needed validation from people like Caldwell. He had found something far more meaningful, the ability to define his own worth. But the old world wasn't going to give up so easily. As Ethan's influence continued to grow, some of the traditional art world's most powerful figures began to take aim at the platform. The criticisms were loud and insistent. They accused the site of undermining the value of art, of turning the artistic process into a commercial enterprise. They claimed that the anonymity of online sales meant that the true essence of art was being lost. Ethan wasn't surprised by the backlash. He had known from the beginning that the old guard would never accept a new way of doing things. But he also knew that change was inevitable. The world was evolving, and the art world had to evolve with it. One afternoon, as he sat in his studio, his phone buzzed with another message from Theo. This time, it wasn't just about business, it was about something bigger. The art world is fighting back. They're trying to shut us down. We need to be prepared. Ethan knew what this meant. It was the beginning of the battle to protect the platform, to defend the community of artists who had placed their trust in him. He had been warned that the system would push back, but now the reality of it was sinking in. This wasn't just about making art anymore. This was a fight for the future of creativity itself. But Ethan was ready. He had fought for his place in the world for far too long to let anyone take it from him now. He stood up from his desk and walked to the easel, staring at the painting he had been working on. It was a bold, defiant piece, a representation of the struggle between the old and new worlds. The colors were dark and stormy, swirling in violent patterns. It was unfinished, but it felt complete, as though it encapsulated everything he was feeling. Ethan took a deep breath and picked up his brush. He had a message to send, and this was the time to send it. As he painted, he realized that the revolution was not just about creating art, it was about creating a new world, one where artists could thrive without being silenced, without being controlled. And he was going to make sure that this world was built on his terms. The platform, the movement, the future, it was all within reach. And Ethan wasn't going to let anyone take it away from him. The following day, Theo called with news that would change everything. The backlash against the platform had escalated. But instead of retreating, they were going to take a stand. "I've secured a meeting with some of the biggest investors in the world," Theo said, his voice steady but urgent. "They're on our side, Ethan. We're not just defending this platform, we're going to take it to the next level. It's time to go public." Ethan's heart raced. Going public was the ultimate step. It was a move that could change the art world forever. The stakes were higher than ever, but Ethan knew one thing for sure, he was ready to face whatever came next. This was no longer just about him. It was about all the artists who had come together to create something new. And together, they would change the world. The meeting with the investors was a turning point. Theo had carefully curated a group of forward-thinking individuals, all of whom shared a vision for the future of art that aligned with Ethan's own. They were not just interested in making money, they were committed to dismantling the outdated systems that had held back artists for so long. And for the first time, Ethan realized that he wasn't alone in this fight. The battle had gone beyond his own personal struggles. It had become a collective movement, a revolution in the world of art. The conference room where the meeting took place was sleek and professional, with glass walls that overlooked the bustling city below. Ethan felt the weight of the moment pressing on his shoulders. This wasn't just a conversation about art, it was about reshaping the very landscape of creativity. Theo introduced Ethan as the key figure in this new artistic revolution. The investors, who had listened to the challenges facing the traditional art world, now saw in Ethan the embodiment of everything they wanted to change. They knew that the art market was shifting, and they wanted to be part of that shift. "You've done something extraordinary, Ethan," one of the investors, a woman named Caroline, said as she leaned forward in her seat. "You've created a space where true artists can be heard, where their work can be seen and valued on their own terms. That's a game changer." Ethan nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. This wasn't just a platform for selling paintings, it was a statement, a call to arms for artists who had long been marginalized by the traditional art world. "We need to take this to the next level," Caroline continued. "This isn't just about bypassing galleries. It's about giving artists the freedom to control their own careers, to dictate how their work is presented, and most importantly, to ensure they are compensated fairly." The other investors nodded in agreement. They were all on board. And as the conversation progressed, Ethan felt a surge of hope and determination. The future of the platform was no longer a question, it was a certainty. The funds, the resources, and the commitment were all in place to make this movement a force to be reckoned with. However, with all this potential came a new set of challenges. The backlash from the traditional art world wasn't going to disappear overnight. Galleries, critics, and even collectors who had long profited from the old system were going to fight tooth and nail to maintain the status quo. The art world had a lot to lose, and Ethan knew that they wouldn't go down without a fight. But as the meeting drew to a close, Ethan realized something. The battle wasn't just about surviving, it was about winning. They weren't just trying to change the system. They were going to create something far bigger, something that would leave an indelible mark on the world of art. And in this new world, the artists would finally be in control. The next few months were a blur of preparation. The platform expanded rapidly, attracting more and more artists who were eager to join the movement. From painters to sculptors, photographers to digital artists, the community grew into a vibrant, eclectic mix of creative minds who were ready to leave the old system behind. Theo and the investors worked tirelessly to secure the platform's future, pouring in resources to ensure that it could handle the growing demand. New features were introduced, making it easier for artists to interact with collectors and buyers, to communicate their stories, and to receive fair compensation for their work. The platform wasn't just about selling art, it was about fostering genuine connections between artists and their audience. Meanwhile, Ethan's reputation as a leader in the movement continued to grow. He was no longer just an artist, he was a symbol of change, a figurehead for the artists who had long been silenced by the traditional art world. And with every new painting, every new collaboration, Ethan reaffirmed his belief in the power of art to challenge, to provoke, and to inspire. One afternoon, after a particularly intense week of meetings and planning, Theo called Ethan with unexpected news. "You're not going to believe this," Theo said, his voice brimming with excitement. "The media wants to do a feature on you. They're calling you the face of a new art revolution. The world is starting to take notice, Ethan. This is just the beginning." Ethan felt a rush of emotions. It had always been his dream to be recognized for his art, but now, it was more than that. He wasn't just being recognized as an artist, he was being acknowledged as a trailblazer, a disruptor in the art world. The change was happening faster than he had ever imagined. As the weeks passed, the media coverage intensified. Interviews, articles, and documentaries began to appear, all centered around Ethan's journey and the movement he had helped create. People from all corners of the world reached out, expressing their admiration for his vision and their desire to be a part of the revolution. It was clear that this was no longer just about Ethan, it was about something much bigger. But even as the recognition grew, so did the resistance from the old guard. Art critics, gallery owners, and collectors who had once dismissed Ethan now found themselves scrambling to maintain their relevance in a world that was rapidly shifting. Some tried to discredit the platform, calling it a fad, a passing trend. Others attempted to label Ethan as a mere businessman, someone who cared more about profits than art. Ethan knew that this was inevitable. No movement worth its salt ever came without resistance. But he also knew that the tide was turning. The momentum was on their side. And with each passing day, more and more artists, collectors, and art lovers joined the movement, realizing that they, too, had a stake in this new world. One evening, as Ethan stood in front of his latest painting, a piece that encapsulated everything he had fought for, he received a message that would mark the final turning point in the movement. It was from Rachel, the sculptor who had reached out to him months earlier. "Ethan, I think it's time we do something big. A worldwide exhibition. All the artists from the platform. A statement to the world that we're here, and we're not going anywhere." Ethan smiled as he read the message. It was perfect. The final piece of the puzzle. This exhibition would be the culmination of everything they had worked for. It would be the ultimate declaration that art, in all its forms, could no longer be controlled by the old ways. The revolution had officially arrived. Together, with the support of Theo and the investors, Ethan began planning the exhibition. It would take place in multiple cities across the world, with live-streamed events allowing people everywhere to experience the art firsthand. The exhibition would not only showcase the works of artists from the platform, it would also feature discussions, interviews, and panels about the future of art and creativity. As the exhibition dates drew closer, the excitement reached a fever pitch. The art world, once so set in its ways, was now on the brink of being forever transformed. The revolution was no longer just a dream, it was a reality. And as Ethan stood in front of his painting, watching the color swirl and take shape, he realized that this was just the beginning. Together, they had changed everything. The old guard was crumbling. The future of art was here. And it was in the hands of the artists.